Emyra, a Vorlag creature just 18 lunar cycles old, was sold off by her own sire-parent. But when the human station master bought her, no one knew that innocent heart would change everything on that space station forever. The sun of the Proxima Centauri system beat down hard on the arid planet Draken IV on that hot summer afternoon. The air felt heavy, a mix of dust and superheated metal. The small Vorlag settlement was mostly still. Only the murmur of bartering in the central square and the low hum of ancient geothermal extractors broke the silence. Emyra stood in the yard of the humble dwelling where she grew up, her worn synthetic fiber tunic, bare feet, hands restless. Her big, bright, scared eyes stared at the packed dirt, trying not to look at the creature in front of her own sire-parent, John. He was a Vorlag with a face weathered by the harsh sun and a hard life, a gruff voice and a gaze so cold it could freeze a power conduit. He never liked his female offspring, never wanted her around. In his stubborn mind, females were for serving, working, keeping quiet, and obeying. He always wanted a strong male spawn, someone robust to help him operate the mining automatons and move heavy solar panels, not a frail female. "I never wanted a female in this hab module," John said, his voice seeming to cut the air. "Females are no good for anything useful, just for cleaning living quarters and synthesizing nutrient paste. I want a strong Vorlag male who can handle the tough stuff, operate the heavy machinery, not some crybaby female." So on that hot afternoon, he sealed a deal that pained the heart of anyone who saw it, a cruel deal that put a price on his own flesh and blood, a life he never wanted to care for. "Caleb," John said, looking coldly at the tall human, "I'm selling this female for a healthy Gromac and a few credit units to pay what I owe. I can't handle this responsibility anymore. I want a Vorlag male to work the mineral fields, not a troublesome female." Caleb, a tall human man with a stern face and calloused hands from working with heavy metals in Draken IV's harsh environment, listened without showing emotion. He knew this was more than a simple transaction between Vorlag, but a sale of life. Yet, he had to keep up his tough image, his reputation as a man who didn't let feelings sway him. "All right," he replied firmly, "I'll take the female. But let's be clear, it's business, no sentimentality." As the deal was closed in the next room, Emyra's dame-parent cried softly, her face marked by the pain of losing her daughter this way. "John, don't do this." "She's our offspring," she pleaded, her voice choked, almost a whisper. But John slammed his hand on the table, crushing any compassion. "Shut up, Mary. If it weren't for your whining, I'd have settled this already. The female's being sold, period." Emyra swallowed her tears, feeling the weight of rejection, the coldness of her fate sealed by a Gromac and some credit units. That Vorlag girl who dreamed of the cosmos seemed trapped with no way out. Caleb extended a hand to her, his face still stern, his voice hard but firm. "Let's go, Emyra. There's no place for you here anymore." The journey to the interstellar livestock station was silent. Caleb didn't speak, maintaining the coldness that protected him from feelings he didn't know how to handle. The sound of the small transport ship's engines and the wind hitting the Vorlag girl's face seemed to scream of an uncertain destiny, full of mixed fear and hope. Draken IV's red dust rose behind the shuttle as Emyra, her heart aching, saw the iron-hide space station for the first time. It was too big for her eyes, full of biocontainment pens created by energy fields, modular storage hangars, and low-gravity simulated grazing areas. A world so different from the cramped dwelling where she grew up. The feeling was a mix of fear and hope, but the silence of the journey only tightened the knot in her throat. When she disembarked from the shuttle, Caleb didn't say a word. His face was grim, his gaze hard. He just nodded for her to follow him to the main living quarters. "This is how it is here," he said, his voice gruff. "If you want to stay, you better learn fast. There's no room for fussiness." Emyra swallowed her sobs, her mouth dry, feeling the weight of that sentence, which sounded more like a warning of a judgment. Martha, the station's nutrient manager, opened the door and greeted Emyra with a welcoming smile, but even that seemed cold against Caleb's distance. The first days were a shock. The light from the solar filtration array beat down on her skin as she learned to care for the cultivated organisms, sweep the metal flooring, clean the hab modules, and prepare synthetic nutrient paste. Caleb was always nearby, watching but never helping. No kind gestures. When Emyra made a mistake, he didn't hide his impatience. "I already told you, it has to be done this way, not your way," he'd grumble, crossing his arms. Emyra tried not to show how much it hurt her, but homesickness and the weight of rejection squeezed her chest. It was one afternoon while Emyra was carrying buckets of recycled water from the air purification unit that she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and came face to face with CJ, the station master's son. "You must be Emyra," he said, a bit sideways with a half smile, a lighter manner than his father's. "That's me," she answered shyly. CJ made an inviting gesture. "If you need help, just ask. Around here, we figure things out together." Despite the boy's friendliness, Emyra felt her biggest struggle was with Caleb, who seemed determined to keep his distance. One hot night, Emyra approached the porch where Caleb was sitting, looking at the sky full of stars of the Proxima Centauri system. "Mr. Caleb," she began, her voice trembling. He didn't even turn his head. "What do you want?" He answered dryly. "I just wanted to know if I did something wrong." He sighed, throwing his head back. "Wrong is being weak. There's no place for those who can't take it here." Those harsh words cut Emyra like knives, but they also lit a silent desire to prove she could be strong. Even with his coldness, Emyra began to feel there was something hidden in Caleb's eyes, a mix of pain and guilt he didn't want to admit, not even to himself. And so out there in that vast, lonely land, two souls hardened by life began to face each other, caught between fear, resistance, and the start of something neither could quite name. The first two lunar cycles on the livestock station were the hardest of Emyra's life. Each day felt like a battle against exhaustion, homesickness, and the harshness of work she'd never faced before. She woke up before the biolights came on, her body heavy, her hands already calloused from so much effort. The water recycling unit was a good ways from the living quarters, and every day she had to go there several times to fetch water, filling large, heavy energy containers, feeling her skin burn under the scorching light of the energy filter. It was a challenge that might seem small to someone who grew up on Earth or other space colonies, but for Emyra, who never had an easy life, it was a test of endurance. The station's hydroponic garden was another daily task. She needed to care for the seedlings, pull bioalgae, and water the plants carefully so nothing died. It was lonely, tiring work, but slowly it began to bear fruit. Small synthetic tomatoes, green herbs, and a few shy artificial carrots started to sprout. At night, tired, she'd sit on the edge of the simple bunk in the back room, looking at the metal ceiling, trying not to cry. She thought of her Dame Parent, her soft, suffering voice, the little affection she'd had in her life, and the pain of being left behind. She also thought about Caleb, how he seemed to carry the universe on his shoulders with that hard, smileless demeanor, but with eyes that hid more than they showed. One night she dreamed of freedom. She dreamed she was running through the vast, cultivated biofields. Free, her tunic billowing in the wind, a laugh escaping her lips as if the pain had vanished. But she woke up to the dawn alarm crowing, and reality weighed heavier than the dream. What Emyra didn't know was that Caleb, in silence, was starting to watch her differently. He saw how she tried, even without knowing everything, how she didn't complain, even when her calluses burned, how she tried to smile at Martha, even with a tired face. And that moved him more than he'd like to admit. Caleb continued with his gruff manner, always watching from a distance, arms crossed, leaning against a laser fence, looking more like a shadow than a man. He offered no help, not a kind gesture. When he passed by, his voice came out harsh, almost a military command. "Don't dawdle there, female. You have to do it right, or you won't have anything to eat." Emyra would lower her head. Those words cut like a knife, but she'd take a deep breath, bite her tongue, and keep going. She wasn't going to give up, not after everything she'd already faced. She wanted to prove to him and to herself that she was strong, that she deserved to be there, that she wasn't just another ordinary Vorlag. The sun of Draken burned strong that morning, punishing the red earth of the containment pen. The smell of waste fluids, plant residue, and sweat was almost unbearable, but Emyra was getting used to it. She approached the Gromac with a milk collection bucket in hand, her heart pounding inside her chest like an out-of-control drum. She'd never milked a Gromac before. She knelt carefully, her body tense, her hands trembling. She tried to imitate what she'd seen others do, but her fingers failed to find the right rhythm. Nutrient milk escaped between her fingers, splashing sideways, and she frowned in frustration, feeling her eyes sting. "Darn it," she muttered, almost voiceless, trying again. "Why is this so hard?" She was so focused on her own frustration that she didn't even notice when Caleb appeared. He was in the pen alley, leaning against the metal gate, his hat covering his eyes, observing in silence. He stayed like that for a while, just watching, studying. Then he walked slowly towards her, his metal-shod boots sinking slightly into the dry mud. When he got closer, Emyra heard his voice, still gruff but different, less harsh, almost patient. "This is how you do it," he said, crouching beside her arm. He took the bucket from her hands carefully, his fingers firm but surprisingly gentle. She froze. Caleb had never been this close. The smell of earth, sweat, and synthetic leather coming from him was strong but not unpleasant. There was something else there, a presence that seemed to fill all the space around Devalabam. "See," he continued, showing the movement with his calloused hands. "You have to squeeze firmly but gently. It's not just strength, it's rhythm. Rhythm and respect for the animal." Emyra looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. Her heart leaped in her chest. This was unexpected, a gesture of care, of attention from him, of all people. You've been doing this a long time, haven't you?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Caleb didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the Gromac. "Since I was a kid. The first Gromac I milked was named Goldie, almost kicked me in the chin." He let out a soft, muffled laugh, almost imperceptible. Emyra laughed too, unintentionally. The sound escaped before she could stop it, and in that moment something broke between them. An old tension, an imposed distance. "Try it like this," Caleb said, handing the bucket back and pulling her closer. His hands lightly touched her arms, guiding her movements. His body almost touched hers. The closeness made Emyra hold her breath. She obeyed, her hands not trembling as much. She followed the rhythm he indicated, trying to absorb every detail. Caleb watched attentively, his face serious, but his gaze was different. There was a gleam there, a softness she had never seen. "Is this right?" she asked, seeking his approval. Caleb nodded slowly without saying anything for a moment. Then he spoke, adjusting the collar of his sweaty shirt. "You're doing okay." Slower, no rush, no need to be scared. Emyra felt a warmth rise to her cheeks. Those simple words spoken in that deep voice stirred something inside her. Something she couldn't name. It was as if he cared. "Thank you," she said softly, looking at the half-full bucket. He stayed there beside her for a few more minutes. He didn't say anything else, just stayed. His presence for the first time felt safe, almost protective. When he finally stood up, he wiped his hands on his pants and looked at the sky. "If you need help, call. I'm around." He said it without looking at her, but there was a weight to his words, an unspoken promise. Emyra bit her lower lip, trying to hold back the smile that threatened to escape. Her heart was racing. Before walking away, Caleb cast one last look over his shoulder. "But don't get used to it. I'm not one for coddling you just to be nice." Emyra nodded, still looking at the bucket, but her lips curved despite herself. "I know you're tough, Mr. Caleb, but I don't think you're as tough as you pretend to be." Caleb stopped for a second as if he were going to retort, but just huffed, adjusted his hat, and walked off with firm steps. She watched until he disappeared beyond the fence, and only then did she let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In that instant, Emyra knew Caleb was made of stone on the outside, but in there something was beginning to melt. The silence hung thick between them after Caleb handed the bucket back. The sound of Gromacs chewing and the wind rustling through the ventilation shafts outside was all that could be heard. But for Emyra, what weighed most was the sound of her own heart, loud, beating too hard for her to ignore. Her hands followed the movements he taught her, now with more firmness. She squeezed, released, felt the jet of nutrient milk hit the bucket with a rhythmic sound, and each time she did it right, Caleb just watched in silence, his eyes fixed on her fingers, her slender arms, the genuine effort she made to learn. "See, now you're getting the hang of it," he said finally, his voice still firm but with a certain hidden pride. Emyra slowly raised her eyes, meeting his. It was rare for them to look at each other for so long. Caleb always avoided it, always looked away, always hid behind that shell of toughness. But in that instant, he didn't look away. I thought you'd never help me," she confessed almost in a whisper. "Always so distant, so angry with me." Caleb frowned slightly, as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. "I'm not good at this," he said at last, rubbing the back of his neck, nervous. "Teaching, talking gently, having patience. Never been my strong suit." Emyra smiled, a sparkle in her eyes. But today was different. He looked away, fidgeting with his belt buckle, not knowing where to put his hands. "It's just, I don't know. You trying, even without knowing how, reminded me of something." "Of what?" She hesitated, looking at the sky for a moment as if searching for courage among the clouds. "Of my mother. When she taught me for the first time, I was small, scared, just like you. And she used to say that everything we learn with effort takes root in our soul, that our hands don't forget." Emyra swallowed hard. That was the first time he'd spoken of the past, of his childhood, of someone who had meant something. "She must have been special," she said softly. Caleb nodded. "She was strong and good, much more than me." He laughed humorously, his eyes hardening again. "But life doesn't forgive those who are soft." Emyra was silent for a moment, then said, "But it also doesn't forgive those who close themselves off too much, who hide from what they feel." The sentence hung in the air between them like a newly revealed secret. Caleb looked at her more intensely now, his dark eyes probing her face as if trying to understand where so much courage came from. Emyra held his gaze firmly, even though she felt her legs almost give way. "You talk as if you know me," he said almost in a challenge. "Maybe I'm starting to," she replied, lowering her eyes for a second shyly. The silence returned, but now it was different. There was no more hardness there. It was a tense silence full of possibilities, and something invisible but palpable was forming between them. "Go rest now," Caleb said finally, getting up. "You've done a lot for today." "I still need to fill the energy troughs and gather the small bioorganisms," she replied, trying to sound firm. He looked at her with that serious expression, but there was a touch of gentleness in his eyes. "I'll finish up later. Go on, go take a magnetic shower. You're so sweaty and your face is as red as a synthetic tomato." He turned his face before adding, "You'll end up fainting from the heat like this." Emyra smiled without showing her teeth. It was his way of saying he cared. "Thank you, Caleb," she said, already moving away slowly, "for the help and for not yelling at me today." He huffed, almost with a laugh caught in his throat. "Don't get used to it, you hear? Today was just a lapse in judgment." Emyra smiled shyly, knowing those harsh words hid an affection he was still trying to understand. Martha, the nutrient manager, was in the kitchen organizing metal pots when she noticed something different about Caleb. It was a hot afternoon, and she saw the station master sitting on the porch, but not alone. Emyra was there, laughing with CJ, the owner's son. Caleb, who was usually scowling and withdrawn, seemed more relaxed. Every now and then, a smile would appear on his face, almost as if the sun had shone inside him. Martha smiled, leaning against the doorframe and whispered to herself, "Could it be that this man's heart is starting to melt?" She had seen a lot on that space station, but she had never seen Caleb so smiley, and the way he looked at Emyra didn't go unnoticed. That evening, while preparing dinner, Martha approached Caleb, who was sitting at the table with the most serious expression, as if nothing had changed. "Mr. Caleb," she began with a mischievous smile, "you're smiling more these days, huh?" He let out a short laugh, trying to hide it. "I'm just seeing things with different eyes, Martha." "Nothing new here." Martha chuckled and insisted, "Oh, I know you're enjoying the girls' company, aren't you? The station feels lighter with her around." Caleb was silent for a moment, then replied in his usual harsh voice but with a different sparkle. "What's this?" "She's just a worker. Nothing more." Martha winked, knowing his ways well. "It's plain as day, Mr. Caleb. You're head over heels, but still want to pretend you're not." Caleb crossed his arms, feigning indignation. "Nonsense. Are you crazy, Martha?" Martha laughed, patting him lightly on the shoulder. "It's a beautiful thing to see, station master." And in that small exchange, the truth was laid bare. No matter how much Caleb tried to hide it, his rough heart was already surrendering to love. One calm afternoon, while resting in the shade of an old fuel storage tank, Emyra and CJ were talking, sharing laughs and confidences. The boy with a mischievous smile talked about daily life on the station, but soon the tone changed. "You know, Emyra," CJ began, looking at the ground, "my dad, he's not always so cold. He only got like this after Mom died." Emyra's eyes widened, surprised by the revelation. "What happened?" she asked, curious and at the same time concerned. "Mom died in childbirth when I was born. Dad was left alone to take care of me, and I don't think he ever got over it. That's why he's so tough. It seems like he's always afraid of feeling too much." Emyra was touched, feeling a pang of compassion for that man who, despite his rigidity, carried an invisible pain. "That must be very difficult," she murmured. CJ nodded. "It is. And his birthday is next week. No one ever does anything special. I don't think he even expects it." Emyra's eyes sparkled with an idea. "Then I'll make a surprise for him. I want him to know that there are people who care." CJ smiled, delighted. "You do that." "I'll plan everything myself," Emyra said, determined, without telling anyone. That night, while the space station slept under the starry sky, Emyra began to think about every detail of the surprise. She wanted it to be simple but full of meaning. Something that could touch that heart that seemed so closed off. She didn't know yet how Caleb would react, but something inside her said this was the chance to show that even in hardship, love could flourish. A few more days had passed since the conversation with CJ. In the cultivation fields, the routine continued to be tough. Emyra woke up early, tended the hydroponic garden, fetched water from the recycler, and helped with the station chores with the same determination as always. Caleb, despite his tough exterior, showed small signs of change. A less stern look, a smile that appeared now and then, even if he pretended otherwise. And then finally, Caleb's birthday arrived. Emyra, full of anticipation and a little nervous, had prepared a simple surprise, but one made with all the affection she felt for him. The night promised to be different, a moment to set aside harsh words and show that even the most closed hearts deserve a little warmth. The space station was quiet that night, lit only by the trembling light of the stars and a few nuclear oil lamps on the porch. Emyra was in the kitchen attending to the final details of the dinner she had prepared for Caleb. It was nothing fancy, just synthetic rice, energy beans slowly cooked, reprocessed meat, and a fresh salad from the hydroponic garden. But every ingredient carried the affection she felt for him, even if he hadn't said it out loud. She set the simple table, placing wild Draken IV flora in an improvised vase, and lit an electromagnetic candle in the center. The atmosphere, despite its rusticity, seemed to gain a special glow with her care. Caleb appeared late in the afternoon, returning from the containment pen. When he saw the table, his gaze hardened for a second, but then softened, as if he were surprised. "What's this?" he asked, his voice a bit dry. "A dinner for you." "It's your birthday, isn't it?" Emyra said, trying to hide her nervousness. Caleb was silent, walking to the table and looking everything over carefully. His eyes swept over the simple, hand-embroidered cotton tablecloth, a rare sight in that dwelling marked by emotional dryness. He sat down, picking up his alloy fork with a slightly awkward gesture, as if he wasn't used to being served that way, with so much care. The food steamed on the clay plate, fresh synthetic rice, pinto energy beans with artificial bacon, pot roast cooked slowly, releasing the smell of golden garlic and yard herbs. There were also pieces of bio pumpkin roasted with synthetic honey, and a freshly squeezed cashew juice chilled with cooling stones placed at the bottom of the pitcher. The smell of homemade seasoning seemed to awaken dormant memories. During the meal, he didn't talk much, but Emyra noticed something different, a discreet gleam in his eyes, an almost imperceptible tremor in his voice when he answered the few questions she asked. "Is it good?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her gaze sought more than an opinion on the dinner. It sought a sign, a crack in that wall he built around his own chest. Caleb chewed slowly, looked at his plate, then at her, fork still in hand, his shoulders more relaxed than usual. "It is," he murmured, his voice a bit. "Very good, actually." Emyra smiled, satisfied with the compliment, which coming from him was almost a declaration. That man wasn't one for sweet words. Each positive syllable seemed to be pulled by force from deep within his chest. "I'm glad you liked it," she said, lowering her eyes with a restrained smile, her hands still trembling with nervousness. When dinner ended, Caleb wiped his mouth with a synthetic napkin and sighed deeply, trying to keep a straight face as if he didn't want to admit how much that gesture had touched him. "Thanks," he said almost inaudibly. Emyra felt her heart race. That wasn't just a word, it was a breach, a silent acknowledgement that she was slowly changing the temperature of that dwelling. She leaned slightly over the table. "It was from the heart, you see. I just wanted to do something nice for you, to show that things can be different here." Caleb was silent, his eyes meeting hers for a few seconds. There was no smile, but there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. But as always, he soon changed his tone. "The wall, though cracked, didn't fall easily. Don't get used to it, you hear? I'm still the same tough station master." She laughed softly but sincerely. "I know, but sometimes even the toughest hearts need a little warmth." Caleb looked at her for long seconds, his eyes almost saying what his words hid. Emyra knew that inside he was softer than he let on, perhaps more lost than ever. That night, amid the smell of home-cooked nutrients, the distant chirping of simulated ecosystem crickets, and comfortable silence, a new chapter began to be written, a chapter where love started to overcome coldness, slowly, without rush, but with all the strength of someone who had learned to fight for what matters. The next morning sun arrived shyly, streaking golden through the window cracks. Myra was still washing the dishes from the night before when she heard the sound of firm footsteps approaching the kitchen door. Caleb appeared, his worn hat on his head, and a smile that rarely escaped him. In his hand, he held the reins of a strong, calm brown Gromac with lively eyes. "Today I'm going to teach you to ride," he announced, his voice gruff but full of firmness. Emyra turned, surprised, wiping her hands on her apron. "Really? I've never ridden a real Gromac." Caleb gave a short laugh, but it wasn't mocking. It was almost tender. "Then it's time you learned." "Come on," she approached, her eyes shining with excitement. She could smell the dry earth mixed with the scent of the Gromac and the synthetic leather saddle. Caleb adjusted the tack with firm hands and then helped her mount, holding her by the waist carefully but firmly. "Hold on tight," he warned. Emyra obeyed, her heart beating fast, not just from fear of falling, but from the closeness. Caleb mounted behind her, placing one of his hands over hers on the reins, guiding her calmly. "Breathe. Let your body follow the animal's movement." They rode slowly through the station's cultivation fields. The wind blew against her face, messing up her hair. The feeling of freedom grew with each thud of hooves on the packed ground. Emyra laughed a few times, half unintentionally, half because she couldn't contain that genuine joy. Caleb watched from the corner of his eye, trying to pretend he wasn't charmed by that sound, but his chest filled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Peace. You look like a kid," he commented, feigning impatience, but the corner of his mouth betrayed his smile. "Maybe I am," she replied, "a kid who never got a chance to play." After a while, Caleb veered onto a hidden path between tall bioengineered trees and green undergrowth until they reached a clearing where the sound of water falling in a cascading hydro system filled the air. "Here," he said, dismounting with agility and extending his hand to her. "I want to show you something." Emyra accepted his hand, and together they walked to the water's edge. The hydro system cascaded strongly over moss-covered rock formations, forming a crystal-clear pool. Birds sang in the tall trees, and the air was fresher there. It's beautiful, she whispered, enchanted. Caleb was quiet for a moment, looking at the water. I used to come here when I was a boy, he said in a low voice. It was the only place I could forget everything. She sat on a nearby rock, observing his expression. Forget what? He hesitated, took a deep breath. The pain, the absence. My father was a hard man, never showed affection. Everything was yelling, punishment, demands. And then I lost my wife too soon. She died in childbirth. It went wrong. Emyra felt a tightness in her chest. I'm so sorry. Caleb shook his head. I never knew how to deal with it. The anger became armor. The hardness became defense. But now you show up with that stubborn way of yours, that quiet smile, and start messing with things I didn't even know still existed inside me. Emyra walked slowly towards him, like someone approaching a wounded animal. She lightly touched his arm. I don't want to change you, Caleb. I just want you to know that you're not alone anymore. He looked at her, the longest gaze they had ever exchanged, a dense silence between them, full of unsaid words. His hand hesitantly sought hers. I don't know how to love, Emyra. Nobody really does. We'll learn together. The breeze blew, making the leaves dance. The sound of the water mixed with the beat of their hearts, fast and sincere. Caleb moved closer, shortening the distance between them, his eyes lost in hers, and for the first time, without the usual coldness, only with truth. Thank you for all this, Emyra smiled, a smile full of tenderness, promise, and hope. In that forgotten clearing, surrounded by green and silence, two wounded hearts finally began to heal together. Emyra drew closer, feeling the comfortable silence between them. I always knew there was something in your eyes, a kind of sadness that time couldn't erase. Caleb turned to her, his eyes shining. I want to apologize for my coldness. I never knew how to be different. Ever since I lost my wife, I closed myself off. I thought it would be easier that way. She looked at him, touched, and said in a soft voice, I already knew. The sad look in your eyes doesn't lie. He smiled for the first time truly. It's that mix of sadness and hope. Caleb moved closer, held her face with his rough hands, and kissed her. It was a kiss full of feeling, mixing pain and desire, fear and surrender. Emyra returned it, feeling that there, in that moment, something new was being born between them. When the kiss ended, Caleb whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. And in that instant, at the hidden hydro system waterfall, two hearts began to heal together. The days passed, and their relationship grew stronger. Emyra started waking up early, accompanying Caleb in the field tasks, learning the names of the gromics, understanding the harvest cycles. At night, the two would sit on the porch, and between sips of synth coffee, they'd exchange confidences and laughter. One afternoon, as the sky was already painted orange by Draken IV's sunset, Caleb arrived with an improvised gift, a sapling of a viridian plant. This is for us to plant together, he said, to grow with it. Who knows, maybe see our children playing in its shade one day? Emyra couldn't hold back her tears. That gesture said everything he still didn't know how to say with words. Caleb began to share more of his story, about how he had to become a man early, take care of his sick father, lose his pregnant wife in a birth that went wrong, and raise CJ practically alone. The boy was what kept me going, he confessed one night. But after that, I closed myself off completely until you showed up. She in turn told him about her pain with her violent sire-parent, her submissive dame-parent, her fear of repeating the cycle. I thought I'd never find a place to call home, she said, her eyes welling up. Well, you found it, he replied firmly. Here with me, with us. The lunar cycles turned into years on the station, and with them, Emyra and Caleb's lives changed forever. Between the sweat of Draken IV's metal and the warmth of starry nights, they shaped a love that grew stronger each day, stronger than any obstacle. Emyra, who arrived with a heavy heart and an insecure gaze, now walked the station with confidence, learning to tame Gromax, care for the hydroponic garden, and be a partner to that man who slowly let go of his hardness to show a side few knew. Caleb, with his rough but fair ways, learned to smile without fear, to hug without shame, and above all, to love without reservation. They faced challenges, difficult days in the cultivation fields, nights of doubt and silence, but always together hand in hand, building a life. 2 years later, under the blue sky of Draken IV and the heat of Proxima Centauri's sun, Emyra and Caleb exchanged vows in front of family and closest friends. CJ, the human boy who once saw Emyra's arrival as a new beginning, was now the ring bearer, with a radiant smile and a sparkle in his eye. He handed the rings to his father and his new mother, leaving everyone emotional. "See, Dad, we're happy," CJ said with the purity and innocence of a child. The party was simple but full of love and hope, where smiles and tears mixed. There was music from a sonic emitter on the porch, artificial cornbread, a plasma bonfire lit, and the smell of the simulated natural environment mixed with the perfume of Draken IV flora. And in the midst of that joy, an unexpected figure appeared, Emyra's Sire-Parent, her face marked by the struggle and pain of years under her husband's shadow. She approached her daughter with tears in her eyes. "Your Sire-Parent," she began, her voice choked. "He passed away a little while ago. I sold the little dwelling where we lived. I'm going to buy a new dwelling in another settlement. I want to start over, far from everything that made me suffer." Emyra hugged her Sire-Parent tightly, feeling the weight of the past finally dissipate, giving way to the hope of a better future. Caleb, beside them, squeezed Emyra's hand as a silent gesture of support and love. There, in that moment, they promised to continue together, protecting the family they had begun to build. And one lunar cycle after the wedding, the most awaited gift arrived, the birth of their first child, a strong, healthy, and lively baby boy. CJ, now an older brother, welcomed the new family member with a wide smile and eyes shining with happiness. "His name will be Gabriel," Emyra said, "an angel's name, because he came to remind us that the great architect never forgets us." Caleb, emotional, held his son in his trembling hands and whispered, "This boy will know what love is from day one, I promise." On that space station, which once saw pain and secrets, now echoed laughter, little footsteps, and renewed dreams. The love that seemed impossible to be born in that harsh land flourished and grew, showing that even the most difficult stories can have happy endings, as long as one has the courage to start over.